November 2020. Millions of people were waiting for one thing. Not a new phone, not a new car, a PlayStation 5. But there was a problem. Even if you had the money, you might not be able to buy one. The console was disappearing from online stores almost instantly. Resellers were pushing prices far beyond retail, and Sony was trying to manufacture a new generation of hardware while the world was dealing with a crisis unlike anything the gaming industry had seen before. But here's the strange part. The PS5 wasn't supposed to become a shortage story. It was supposed to be Sony's greatest technological leap yet. And to understand how it got there, we have to go back to the generation that almost changed Sony forever. Before the PS5, Sony had already experienced one of the biggest victories in gaming history. The PlayStation 2 became a cultural phenomenon. But the PlayStation 3 was different. Sony entered that generation with ambitious hardware, a complicated architecture, and a high price. The company had to fight its way back. Then came the PlayStation 4. This time, Sony simplified the proposition. Developers were given a more familiar architecture. The company emphasized games and accessibility, and PlayStation rebuilt its momentum. That success created a new problem. How do you follow a winner? You can't simply make another PS4. Sony needed something that would make the word next generation actually mean something. Sony's answer was hidden inside the PS5. The machine used a custom AMD processor, 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory, and a high-speed SSD. But the SSD was particularly important. For years, game developers had designed around slow mechanical hard drives. Loading screens weren't just annoying, they were part of the architecture. Sony wanted to change that. The PS5's internal SSD was designed around extremely fast data delivery, allowing developers to rethink how worlds could be built and streamed. Then Sony added another piece of the puzzle, the DualSense controller. Its adaptive triggers could change resistance. Its haptic feedback could reproduce different sensations. The goal wasn't simply better graphics. Sony wanted players to feel the generation. June 2020. Sony finally showed the PS5, and the design immediately became part of the conversation. It was enormous. White panels wrapped around a dark central body, and Sony revealed two versions, one with a disk drive, one without it. Months later, the prices were confirmed. $499.99 for the standard PS5, $399.99 for the digital edition. The launch was set for November 2020. Everything was ready, except the world. COVID-19 had changed everyday life. Retail operations were disrupted, supply chains were under pressure, and demand for entertainment at home was enormous. Sony announced that launch day PS5 sales would be conducted online, rather than through traditional in-store queues. Then the console arrived. November 12, 2020. The PS5 went on sale in major markets, and demand immediately overwhelmed supply. Sony later described the demand as historic. For consumers, the experience was brutal. Refresh, click, sold out. Try again, sold out. And somewhere in the middle of this chaos, another industry appeared, the resale market. Scalpers used automated tools and bulk purchasing strategies to acquire consoles and resell them at inflated prices. The PS5 had become something unusual, a product people were desperate to buy, but couldn't reliably find. So why did people want it so badly? Because Sony wasn't selling only hardware, it was selling access to an ecosystem. At launch came games such as Demon's Souls, Spider-Man, Miles Morales, Sackboy, and Astro's Playroom. Then the library expanded. Ratchet and Clank, Returnal, Horizon Forbidden West, Gran Turismo 7, God of War, Ragnarok, Marvel's Spider-Man 2. Every major release gave Sony another reason to keep players inside PlayStation. And slowly, the PS5 stopped being impossible to find. It became the foundation of Sony's next gaming era. The PS5 generation wasn't only about console sales. PlayStation itself was evolving. Digital purchases became increasingly important. PlayStation Plus was redesigned into multiple tiers, and Sony began bringing major PlayStation titles to PC. The strategy was changing. The console remained the center of PlayStation, but the games were becoming the real platform. That distinction would become extremely important. Then, Sony did something unexpected. It redesigned the machine. In 2023, the newer PS5 became more than 30% smaller by volume than the original model. The digital edition could also accept a separately sold disk drive. Sony was no longer simply launching a console, it was refining an ecosystem. And then came the expensive experiment. November 7th, 2024, the PS5 Pro arrived. A more powerful GPU, advanced ray tracing, Sony's PSSR upscaling technology, and a price of $699.99 in the United States. Suddenly, Sony was asking a very different question. How much would players pay for the best possible version of a console generation? For some gamers, the answer was yes. For others, $700 crossed a line. But the experiment revealed where Sony believed the market could go. By the end of 2025, Sony reported that the PS5 had surpassed 92 million units on a cumulative sell-in basis. That is a remarkable number. But the most interesting part of the PS5 story isn't the number. It's what happened around it. A console designed before a global pandemic, launched during a supply crisis, transformed into a scarce commodity, supported by some of PlayStation's biggest games, then expanded into a broader ecosystem of hardware, software, and network services. The PS5 wasn't perfect. It was expensive. It was difficult to find. And the generation never unfolded exactly as anyone expected. But perhaps that's what makes its story so compelling. Because the PS5 didn't simply arrive at the beginning of a new generation. It arrived at the moment the entire gaming industry was changing. And Sony wasn't just trying to build the next PlayStation, it was trying to decide what PlayStation would become next.